guest for you guys today. Harris Wilkinson is the Chief Creative Officer of TMA within the Omnicom family, and he's also an accomplished screenwriter. Harris is an award-winning creative executive and storyteller who serves as CCO at the marketing arm, a prominent Omnicom agency known for his non-linear career path. Wilkinson uniquely bridges the worlds of Madison Avenue advertising and Hollywood entertainment, overseeing decentralized creative teams across TMA's hubs in LA, Chicago, New York, and Dallas. Since taking the creative helm at TMA, Wilkinson has been instrumental in shifting the agency's focus towards deep cultural resonance and multidisciplinary TV experiential digital leadership. Agency has seen massive growth and generated high-profile, award-winning campaigns, earning accolades from the Cannes Lion, the One Show, and the Clios for blue chip clients, including State Farm, their massive Super Bowl spot last year, Die Hard, the viral Die Hard is Back campaign, Six Flags, acclaimed horror-themed experiential marketing, and PepsiCo, Wendy's, and Morgan Stanley, to name a few. Prior to his rise at TMA, Wilkinson sharpened his advertising teeth as a creative director at TBWA Chiat in Los Angeles, crafting iconic work for brands like Gatorade, Miller Lite, and Buffalo Wild Wings. Parallel to his advertising career, he's also a veteran WGA screenwriter and television producer with over 2 decades of experience. His entertainment credits include selling dozens of feature scripts and original television pilots to major studios like Universal, New Line, Fox, NBC, and Sony, writing and producing 40 episodes of unscripted thriller television, including My Haunted House and My Crazy Ex for A&E, and writing the feature film The Leprechaun Origins for Lionsgate, and an adult young novel, The Forever Boy. Harrison, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Dylan. You are my walk-up music. I wish it was dozens of features. It is a dozen. It's a dozen.
Just a dozen. Well,
yeah, just a dozen. A lot of blood went into that. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Let's go, man. Yeah, well, appreciate you coming on. So, you've had obviously a really unique career that has spanned advertising and the entertainment industry, and be able to kind of straddle both sides, and do it, over most of the entirety of your career. You've been able to have a foot in both sides, but would be great to hear a little bit about the context of where'd you grow up, what'd you study, and what got you into the advertising industry originally?
Sure. I grew up in Ohio. I've said before it's by accident, but I was there all the way through college. But my father was British, was a British citizen up until he passed away a few months ago. And my mother's a New Yorker, and Ohio was kind of a weird place for them to be. But like I said, I was there through college. I was interested in advertising in college. I didn't take any of the courses. I just, I was an English lit creative writing major. So I was writing, a lot of long form in the classes, and I had an interest in the industry, but to be honest, I didn't study it. I didn't take any of the classes that were offered in the journalism school specific to advertising. I just put together a book on my own and cold called agencies in Chicago relentlessly until people agreed to meet with me. I actually took a Greyhound bus the second trimester of my senior year, which was ridiculous, to Chicago. I thought it would be kind of this literary adventure. It was terrible, but I went to Chicago, met with people, got some guidance, realized I was competing with kids coming out of the ad school with very slick portfolios, but I didn't want to go back to school after I finished. So I, moved there in the fall after I graduated and just kept at it, kept in touch with the agencies, and finally DDB hired me. I was the youngest creative in the department by over a decade.
Wow. What years were you at DDB?
I was in the mid 90s where I started. Okay. I was there for a couple of years, and then I went to J. Walter, and then got interested in a screenplay, which was what got me to Los Angeles the first time. I sold a script to Universal. But, the way I had approached it, I was really interested in advertising. I was thrilled when I got there. DDB was an incredible proving ground, and the baptism by fire, just to being surrounded by everyone there was senior at least, and I was definitely the puppy. But they kind of threw me in, and their expectations weren't that I would operate as a junior because they didn't have them at the time. They started bringing them in afterwards. It wasn't, I guess, a disaster, but, they gave me real projects, TV and radio. They expected me to produce work, and I had no idea what I was doing, obviously. And then I was on set on my first shoot, and the director asked me about screenplays, and I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. And so I started writing screenplays. So I think both careers were intentional in that I was interested in them, but I didn't do kind of the due diligence. Honestly, I didn't go to film school. I didn't go to ad school. I just sort of, I think, wrote my way into it, and just sort of pig-headed, probably a combination of being pig-headed and naive. And Hollywood kind of worked out the same way. Wrote scripts, cold calls, cold emails, got interest, got an agent, and then, was able to start selling work, which makes it sound, honestly, a lot easier than it is.
I love it.
Yeah.
I've actually been doing a kind of a retrospective on DDB, obviously, since the brand was sunset, during the new merger. Have had a chance to interview, David Angelo from David and Goliath and a few other, DDB veterans that kind of cut their teeth at that shop. I wonder what you think, was there something unique about that environment that you think was a major stepping stone on how you think about creatively or your kind of entry into the advertising world? Because it seems like that theme of everybody's working, people were kind of living there around the clock. It had an energy that a lot of people were very sad to see go when, they finally sunsetted that brand during the most recent merger.
It did. I mean, it was incredible. When I was there, Bob Scarpelli was still heading it up. And I worked with a lot of great people. Like I said, I got, real opportunities. There are times I think now juniors don't often get put on real projects, or if they do, they're sort of backfill. The expectation is pretty low. We had a cellular client back in the day. No one else wanted to do the radio. And I think my first year I might have produced 40 radio spots. And you really learn about theater of the mind. You learn about casting and production and the things you can do to elevate work. But I'd say overall DDB was, it was so much fun to work there. The energy was great. The people were terrific. They kind of had that combination of, I think, a Midwestern warmth, but still were very savvy. They were definitely savvy marketers. But that was, at that time, you were still, the agents still had big parties. The agency still had people, met up with people at other agencies after work. Like the Chicago ad community was when I first moved to LA, it was very hard to leave that. Loved how tight knit that community was. You knew people at every shop in town, and they all kind of spent time together. And there was kind of this rising tide lifts all boats kind of mentality to the creativity. And I was sad when that name was sunset, and I get back into Chicago, we have an office there. And when I'm back there, I used to walk past the old building on, East Wacker. And, that was the place where I'd started my career. Trucking up that next to the bridge, it was great. And I think as a first agency, probably about as good as it gets, honestly.
Yeah.
A real mix of clients, there was obviously like the Bud Light and Budweiser. There was also, clients like McDonald's. So there were all these blue chip brands that you got to work on, the real brands with real media spends where the work was very, very visible, which is great.
Yeah, I love that. What do you think it is about the LA community that's maybe a little less tight knit than Chicago? I feel like maybe in LA, creatives kind of get stewed in with the rest of the Hollywood soup, and it's kind of like one monolith. Everybody's doing something creative. You're either an actor or a fashion designer, a musician, or an influencer, or you're working on studio productions, TV or digital or commercials. Do you feel like because it's kind of the industry of LA, it's a little less tight knit?
Well, there's a few things. It's changed. I will tell you, when I started, when I first got to LA, and I was self-work, but I did freelance. I freelanced with Gray and Ogilvy for years. They were great because I could do a couple days and I had time to write. And Hollywood projects are very erratic, first of all. Secondly, and the Guild still hasn't really solved this issue. It can take forever to get paid. You can paper a screenplay and you might not see a nickel for 9 months. It's just a very slow process. Yeah, people don't realize that. You'll read about guys, they'll sell a script for $1 million and they're still at Kroger, wrangling shopping carts because they got to pay the bill. But at the time, you didn't talk about Hollywood actually in advertising. Like when I was in LA the first time, I did 2 stints there because the agencies didn't want to hear about it. There were enough people who had screenwriter aspirations. And I think there was a perception that made you take advertising less seriously. Now that has changed a ton. And now there's kind of this sort of acceptance that the two overlap and can inform each other. And obviously kind of the push towards advertising becoming entertainment. But at the time, that wasn't really the case. I will tell you, there are so many good talent. There's so much good talent in LA, but it is a less overall probably friendly environment. The agencies at the time, and I've worked at some competitive shops there, and the teams really are in a heat against each other. And I do think culturally it feels very different than Chicago. I love both for different reasons. I didn't mind the competition in LA. I think the competition's good. It gets you to kind of like up your game and deliver the best work, but it also didn't have that ad community. You'd meet people that worked at all the agencies, but like in LA, they weren't getting together after work. And part of that was literally the real estate. People drive a long ways. Chicago, everyone was nestled downtown at the time. So you would just sort of organically gather at the bars downstairs. And it's not like that in LA.
Yeah. LA, like if there's an event in Burbank and you live on the West Side, that's like going to another planet or something like that.
It's not happening. Yeah. It's like out of the question. And the agencies are all over. I mean, there's a lot now, obviously down where, where Chiat was.
Yeah. The Playa Vista kind of Metroplex. Yeah.
There's a bunch there, but there are some others, they're up in Hollywood, and the distance between those two is, it's like 4-day drive.
Yeah, it's wild. So, you kind of hinted on the idea of like advertising in more recent iterations, moving into the world of branded content, people creating marketing or brand funded entertainment, or shows on Netflix like F1, or where brands are really not just like something that shows up on screen or a logo flash, but it's really like a primary character. Think about the most recent like Brad Pitt F1 story. Like basically it's one long advertorial for the F1 sport, and it was based off of how successful their Netflix show was. Where I imagine that was a big driver. Be curious, as I basically have subscriptions to every SVOD channel because I can afford them. And I accidentally hit the YouTube premium button the other day, and I was like, wait a minute, I didn't mean to do that. And then I, unsubscribed to it, but then it kind of gave it to me for free for 30 days. And just last night, I lost access to it. And I was like, man, it was so good to be able to watch YouTube without ads. I'm thinking about turning it back on tonight. But as and maybe that's a privileged perspective. Like some people can afford to you can almost like afford to avoid ads. It's like a lifestyle choice if you want. Right. But where consumers either through, paying to opt out of ads or using ad blockers, or spending time in ecosystems like gaming that are less easy to target, audiences. How important do you think the skill set of being a brand storyteller versus a commercial creator is becoming in the industry?
I mean, you have to. I do think there are places where you can force the eyeballs, but and obviously you can pay for reach, but ultimately you do want to entertain. I think because you're fighting for attention, and the landscape is so vast now, and it's so fractured. How many people, even when you watch kind of linear, like if you're watching a sporting event on like one of the classic kind of networks, you're still probably second screen. You've got your iPad or your phone nearby, and possibly right up in your face. And it has changed things a lot. I think the entertainment push. TMA was early in the branded content space, with Uncle Drew and Pepsi Test Drive. And then there was a period where that sort of went away, and people keep talking about like this fractured attention span. But now you see that actually there's this data that, Gen Z will engage in something if it's given them something back, and they'll spend time with something. And when you mentioned the Halloween horror piece, we made a 5-minute film 2 years ago. Last year, we made nearly an 8-minute film. And we had something like a 50% completion rate on the people who got served that ad. And that's crazy, right?
Wow,
but it was a piece of entertainment. And the way it spoke to the experience you'd have at Six Flags at Halloween was through the lens of a horror story. It wasn't an ad. We weren't, you would see coasters and kind of, the creature makeup they would have, and then the fact they have mazes, but that was all kind of baked into a story versus sort of shouting these things out like a mattress commercial, And I think that because it was entertainment, people celebrate it as entertainment, and they engage with it as a piece of entertainment, and the ads are baked in there. And it's interesting. I mean, you watch, we deal a lot, our entertainment division deals a lot with product placement, but it's one thing to have like a Pepsi can with a logo facing in a piece, but now you're seeing, characters get integrated. Jake from State Farm was integrated as a character into Running Point, right? Running Point's a great example too, because Sephora, clearly a sponsor, if you see the ads that would run during OTT, but then there's a whole sequence within the storyline where Sephora makes over a locker room. And so I think as a consumer, you feel a little bit that's an ad, but it's organic to the story. And they're talking about professional basketball where you're accustomed to seeing advertising in the arena and, kind of all over the place. The players make brand deals, et cetera. And so I think that the entertainment has become more important, and brands are kind of realizing, look, it's not just like that one time a year, Super Bowl, when people tune in and opt in and choose to watch ads. I think you have to intersect them at all times. And you do see the work that goes viral, right? You see the work that gets shared, and, 99 times out of 100, what it shares is some kind of human connection, whether it makes you laugh or makes them cry but it connects to something on a primal human level, which is what entertainment does as well. And advertising, to say that it's just to trigger a response and drive like affinity and then, get the register to ring, I think is a flawed perception now. Those two have to meet. You've got to give people to get, and they literally can turn their eyes. Like if an ad runs on TV that they're texting or they're suddenly on Instagram, you've lost them. And so you have to give them a reason to engage. It was different back in the day when there were only a couple channels and, you had no choice. Now people have nothing. You got to read the paper. Now people have nothing but options. It is so hard to hold attention,
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think we talked about this last time we spoke, but my favorite recent branded entertainment moment was on the TV show Landman on Paramount, where the character that is, the main character who's kind of the, reformed oil baron, guy in kind of the sunset of his life, played by Billy Bob Thornton.
Right.
He's, you can't really tell, is he an alcoholic? Is he a recovered alcoholic? It's very like he's on this vagueness spectrum on
right.
like, where he identifies. But one of the funny scenes is they come up to him and they offer him like a whiskey or a beer or something like that. He's like, "No, I'm an alcoholic. I don't drink, but I'll just bring me a Michelob Light," And it's like, and it's funny. And I've told that story, I think, multiple times, and it's imprinted the Michelob brand on my brain from that comedic moment where I got a little bit of a chuckle out of it. But if you really think about like, what are they trying to communicate to the consumer? This beer is so light, it's got so low calorie intake and such little alcohol that you might as well not even call it beer. And next time you go to the store, you might say, okay, well, yeah, maybe that's the one I'm going to grab. It's done in play and in a funny way, but it really does communicate the brand message, which is like beer that's not even beer, to some extent.
That's an interesting one. I'd love to know the story behind that.
Yeah, me too.
That is really interesting. Yeah, you can pop it before a workout, I guess. I don't. It's interesting. You can see that both as problematic and beneficial to the brand. I'm going to look that one up, Dylan. I'm going to get back to you on it.
Thank you. All right. So, when was the first time you got an opportunity to work on a Super Bowl campaign?
There've been a lot over the years of opportunities. That doesn't mean they netted in.
That doesn't mean they made it on the screen.
Yeah, but we launched, when we just a few, like 7 years ago now, I guess, and it was a pregame ad when we introduced the new Jake. So it was a pregame ad where we created kind of the classic initial, what are you wearing, Jake from State Farm? We recreated that with the new character, and it aired before the Super Bowl. This must be, I'm terrible at math, but like 2019 or something. And then of course we did Drake from State Farm, and then had a couple of years off. And then of course this last one here. So the others exist in the halls of dead dreams. There's a lot of them for a lot of good brands that are kicking around. It's always like that. Super Bowl has I think there's more opportunities now to make Super Bowl worthy work, especially because of OLV. You see phenomenal work and you're like, oh, gee, like even when we made the Die Hard spot with Bruce Willis, the brand talked about it. I mean, we made a 2-minute broadcast spot and they got a terrific buy, during the football season, and they talked about the Super Bowl, but they were like, we're not going to run a 2-minute spot. Like the investment was just so enormous, but to me, it was a Super Bowl worthy spot in terms of, entertainment and everything. But yeah, so it was really over the past few years in terms of successfully getting them, across the finish line. And they're always, agencies start on them, almost a year out, really. A lot of times it's like 9 months out, you start on them and it's this iterative process. And as you go along, like the briefs may change. Businesses obviously face new challenges. There's a lot of deviations along the way. And then all the other things, because it's so high stakes, getting the director you really want for the project, getting the cast. We had something, still one of my favorite things probably had ever been a part of to date, where there was a key cast member we just couldn't lock. And it didn't happen. And it was a bummer. It killed the whole project. And at the time, we debated whether it really hinged on that one, but it was a battle we weren't going to win. And I think honestly, in hindsight, probably it was the right call. Painful at the time, but so there's all those variables with Super Bowl that you don't necessarily have with a traditional production. There's always another director. There's always other cast, but Super Bowl is so specific.
Is that a risky, it almost feels like you have to do it, but there's also a risk involved where you start from the position of like, oh, like this particular insight or this idea is attached to this song that we might have to get the rights to, or this particular actor, actress who may or may not want to do it, or we might not have the budget, or they might not be available. It almost feels like you have to go in with that level of specificity in some instances. But, you tell me, like, do you usually start from the insight and the idea and then match into the song, the celebrity, or do you write from the other direction where you kind of arrive at the end product and then kind of back into the right concept?
Sorry for the noise.
You're good.
Shooing an animal away. It's not a child. We goes both ways. I think at TMA we're fortunate because we have such a huge talent department. We broker more talent deals than anyone else in the country, and maybe one of the biggest in the world. And so because they broker that, they don't operate as agents. We'll help other agencies as well book talent. For all sorts of things. And we have a music division and entertainment I had mentioned. So usually we have a pretty good idea ahead of time. You can vet to a point, right? But the agents can't give you a firm answer until things are real. So I think that, you always want to start with the idea. We would never go in with a celebrity first idea. There are, spaces, and certainly there's IP that can be very celebrity dependent. And that doesn't mean it's the only solution to the brief, but if that's the idea that's really getting put forward, then obviously you're a little bit backed into a corner because you need to get that talent to kind of close the loop. And of course, people can fall in love with things and you can't really unravel that sweater. It's too late. This year we knew because of, Living on a Prayer with, Bon Jovi, we knew we had kind of a line of sight to the music pretty early because of the music. But there were questions. It was like, can you license the full track? Can you license it and change the lyrics? And there are all those questions along the way. And you'll get an answer from an artist sometimes that isn't real until, again, the dollars are on the table. That one, it worked out really, really well. He was, amenable to the change. That music had never been licensed for a Super Bowl spot. And he was fine with, the lyrics being shifted to kind of serve the purposes we needed. But in that one, the music was the critical piece. Cast was important, but the music was the piece that kept me up at night to make sure that deal kind of went through. Because with cast, there's variables, there's different ways to play it. So I think it depends, but I would say that I'm sure it happens where a spot is comes forward as just it's a hot moment in time, right? And it has to be that thing, but it's never the ideal way to work. And I wouldn't say we work. It starts, it's a strategic foundation and you've got an insight and you answer the brief in the smartest way possible. And then if that happens to be, for instance, IP dependent, then you're on this path to lock in the intellectual property and make it happen. But we'd never go intellectually property first, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we talked about this last time, but the fact that John Bon Jovi was like the celebrity announcing the Patriots running out onto the field, he had an association with the team. Was the fact that he was a huge football guy something that you guys knew about going into into the campaign, or was that something that kind of surprised you? And the fact that he made that appearance was almost like you saw him there and it's like, oh yeah, he's got music in a Super Bowl campaign at State Farm, or was that just like a surprising delight moment?
We knew he was a fan. He's pretty public about that. I would love to be able to say that we, engineered that, but we did not.
Yeah. pretty nice set of circumstances.
God gave us a break. They never give you a break, Dylan. Like that's the one. It was great. The timing was nice too, because we were the first spot there after kickoff. So there was the proximity of that was really, really nice. But that was just one of those lucky strikes. And you don't get a ton of those, so they're always nice when they happen.
I love it.
Yeah.
Is that campaign going to stretch it into any other kind of campaignable work? Is that that idea of like we're halfway there, the inauthentic, halfway version of the real thing? Is that a campaign, or is that just kind of it's the Super Bowl and that is what it is, and we probably won't see it again?
It has been a campaign. There's so many ancillary elements that support it, and it really was like a campaign launch, and that really was a shift. We'd been in kind of this space where we were drawing comparisons but weren't pointing to specifics. So you might say if you need like a defensive captain and instead you want Aiden Hutchinson but you get a C captain, obviously he's not going to get the job done in that context, or the King Henry versus King Henry, or Trainer versus Megan Trainer. Those things are kind of humorous ways of illustrating that it's not the same as State Farm, but they didn't get into the weeds of kind of insurance moments and what actually needs to be cared for. And so this was a pivot where halfway there is obviously useless. Like I think that I love the tension inherent in that name and within the lyrics, because obviously State Farm's positioning, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, is a promise to show up. And halfway there is the opposite of that. It's kind of this, I guess, disregard for the customer's needs. And so we created halfway there really to embody the way people might feel about their insurance. And then, of course, used humor to illustrate these moments where you need someone to have your back. And it does illustrate a bit of a shift in the business where we're getting more down to like the brass tacks. There are things that make State Farm different. And there have been times where they make an awareness play. And I think, now the work is a bit more specific about what you get. And, part of that is just sort of the landscape of the business and, different business challenges. And you see this happen in a lot of categories where they'll go brand heavy and then they'll get into the weeds and they go back to the brand and they go back to the weeds. You see it in QSR all the time, these kind of waves up and down. And I think that it's a nice hybrid. I think that the work's at its best when it embodies what they do, but in an entertaining way, I think is the best of that work. And insurance is one of those things, the client will say this, no one wants to talk about it or think about it. It's invisible until you need it. It's just out there. It's this bill you have to pay. And so, I do think it's important to entertain, and their main thing is always to just drive consideration. Like if you can't get the quote, obviously you can't close it. So just being in the top 3 in consideration has classically been the goal. And I just think in the new work, it's a bit more pointed about the difference. And again, like you're usually not going to feel that difference until you get to a pain point, and then it's too late, right? If you're filing a claim, you can't, someone rear-ended the car, you can't swap. You're stuck. You have the guy you have, and you need them to come through. So pre-existing conditions not exempt in this type of insurance. It is important. And it's interesting work to work on because of the role it plays in people's lives in so many different life stages, which I think is interesting too. And their point of difference, obviously, also with the agents. There's 19,000 of these people kind of in the neighborhoods, and they're at the Little League games, and they know the people. They're like literally like Main Street shops, and I think that changes the brand too. Like the DNA of the brand is different than their competitors. it's gratifying
Yeah.
to work on it. Yeah.
I love that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about resurrecting Hollywood icons and Hollywood IP for campaigns. We talked a little bit about the Die Hard work with Bruce Willis being a massive viral hit, him being a iconic star. But we're also kind of in this moment of like nostalgia, where streaming and fast channels and VOD makes kind of the entire canon of the entertainment world at your finger. You've got millennials coming of age with Gen Alpha kids who, there was this trend this summer, like, Dad, what were you like in the 90s? I don't know if you saw that trend.
Right.
And it's like, I've been watching these movies with my Gen Alpha 10 and 12-year-old daughters. Like, we watched Clueless the other night as a family. There are TV shows like the Gilmore Girls that are like the most watched shows on Netflix, and they're rebooting and doing specials, and Warner Brothers has a massive fan event at the studio. Like, do you think this kind of new generations discovering old Hollywood IP where it makes sense, do you think this is right ground for brands to kind of tap into nostalgia, tap into old IP, and kind of resurrect characters, and basically be the force that brings those characters back to modern moments with a new story arc, but around a brand? Do you think those are good opportunities for brands to lean into right now?
I do. I mean, it's interesting. You've seen a lot of it. Actually, you could even think about Duncan's Super Bowl spot where it brought all these characters back. And yeah, I think the show is it like Bluey has like, I don't know, people have watched billions of hours around the world. I mean, there's really interesting things. There's also like that level of comfort where they say people would rather kind of rewatch the things they already know, and it's a form, I guess, of a mild antidepressant. Like, it gives them some sense of stability in a very erratic and chaotic world. I think it's great when brands do it when it's done correctly. It's unfortunate when you take intellectual property and sort of sully it. I think that there are examples, obviously, of both. I can speak specifically to Die Hard. We had to get Disney Fox approval at every step of the way because we brought back characters, and Argyle had survived the first movie, and we brought him back, and that was that actor. And when we blew him up in the end of the commercial, that became part of the Die Hard canon. Like, that short film is actually part of like the Die Hard canon in terms of how the story arcs were resolved and how they went. And so they were, Disney's, they're pretty intent. And so that one really, we had to honor the IP. And there are examples of IP where, IP gets sold off and then sort of anything can happen with it. And you hate to, I think, see something that's beloved just simply get turned into an ad. I think that goes back to fan culture and wanting to be additive to fans. And that one specific example, I can tell you, when we launched, you're nervous, right? Because it's a battery commercial. And I think it might've been in the Hollywood Reporter or something else, or like the headline might've even said, it was something along the lines of, the newest Die Hard is a battery commercial, and I mean, but I mean, look, this is what we do. But the comments, like the fan base, it was a huge relief to us. The fan base, like people really loved it. They liked it better, honestly, than some of the films. And so that was great. And I think we were really, again, deliberate, and we knew the intellectual property. We studied the intellectual property, and we were true to it. And I think that is on the brands and agency, all the partners, production. It is a responsibility, if you're going to leverage something people love, to not ruin it. And there are plenty of times when it does get ruined. They bring back characters, and like, oh God, like, better to have left that story alone. But I think, again, it goes back to entertainment. That people inherently are drawn to X, Y, and Z, and of course brands are going to want to leverage that and use it. It's just the touch of how you use it is the trick.
I love that. Yeah, I know my wife showed me this clip on social, like specifically around the Gilmore Girls, where these characters in a new, I don't know which feature film it was and what movie it is even, but just the fact that there's this dialogue about the Gilmore Girls in this movie that's coming out soon was like enough for her to say, I want to go and see that movie. Like, just like, even like a funny, and it was like, the conversation was supposed to be kind of this intense moment with these alpha male guys having a conversation about the Gilmore Girls, like creates this comic relief moment, but also this like attachment to that wider fan base that's kind of trending, where like, my wife, who would never go see an action movie, quite frankly, is willing and open because there's like this moment in it. It's like a homage to something she cares about.
That's funny. I mean, that is possibly the only homage in that entire film. You may have seen like the 12-second snippet that covers it, but sure.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I mean, there's so much nostalgia. We talk about this a lot in the work. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, we all know that fashion is cyclical, but to see entertainment kind of bubble back through, and to young kids talking about shows like the Golden Girls, like I never in my life would have dreamed that would be a conversation again. But it is.
Yeah. The Apple trending TV and film section is always a pretty interesting thing to watch as like a barometer to culture of like, sometimes it's half anime shows and stuff like that too, which is interesting now.
Yeah, the explosion of that too. And I mean, there's data to support this, but also just observationally, you literally can see like that comfort, the seeking comfort. And it's just the last, I mean, it probably predates the pandemic, but I think since the pandemic onward, it has just been one thing after another, and I have, daughters, and the things a little bit older than your kids, but the things they're worried about and the kind of the existential fears they have. And they themselves will retreat to certain things and rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. And again, I think it's just a form of like, it's medicating in a way.
Self-soothing.
It's like a comfort meal, it's a nice place to spend your time, and how it's going to end. So all the anxiety is stripped out of it. I mean, it's culturally, it's fascinating. It is really, really interesting to me to be less open to news stories. I think it's a moment in time. Like, this too shall pass.
Yeah, and I think also like the bingeability of being able to just fall asleep to the same show every night is an interesting. The technology makes it just so much easier and so much more approachable to quickly access things from the past. I'd be curious, as somebody who's spent a lot of time focusing on the narrative arc of screenwriting, beginning, middle, and end, a climax, and now to see modern advertising, especially for social, having to hook people in 2 seconds before they swipe. How do you think about, approaching storytelling for a social first audience now with this shorter attention span? But then you also see things like vertical dramas, which are now taking, a traditional format and giving it a new platform and a new way to experience narrative. So I'd be curious what your take is on the explosion of these vertical dramas.
Well, I mean, I worked a lot in dramatic television, and that, the cold open was always a thing. There was always a grab. Features are different. There are features that have a cold open. I personally have like, my attention span isn't as good as I would like it to be. And I think my patience for storytelling is probably, in terms of people who've worked in film, I might be at the end of a shorter attention span. I kind of want to get to it. So I think in television, that classic kind of cold open to grab you, that's been around, for decades. And it makes sense in social. People are scrolling again, like the next option is like a finger swipe down, you're going to come to the next thing. And so people will just deviate so quickly. And we do obviously a lot of social work for a lot of clients. And so that is structured differently to get the grab. Vertical television is fascinating. There's actually something we might outside of TMA might produce this summer in the vertical television space. And that vertical programming is really interesting, again, because of that structure and those 2-minute increments and like the grab. I mean, there's a few things you'd notice, even if you look at the scripts laid out, like the repetition is insane because you're coming back. I mean, it's last second's episode, but it's not just a hard break and they pick back up. So there's a repetition, probably honestly, like a callback to the old soaps. there's like this repetition, this build and cliffhanger, and again and again and again and again. And the fact that now there's going to be vertical dramas, I mean, they're already on Disney, like Disney Plus, like the fact that it blew up so quickly is fascinating. And also what people will spend. So they get the, I don't know, 6 to 9 episodes for free. And then they start opting in the same way, like in Clash of the Titans or whatever you're buying.
It's like digital gold.
Well, it is. People spend hundreds of dollars to watch all these episodes. They would never spend that on Netflix. You know, they're like, oh, you raised my monthly, you know, and so it's really interesting. And I, you know, I will say there was a time when I was very averse to kind of, you know, I love the landscape. I love the wide cinematic field, but there are interesting things about the vertical field. You know, there's a lot of faces. They're very close on the face, and the face apparently people really connect with. But as a storytelling device, it's interesting because your field of vision is so small. And so it's like when you see a scene in a scary movie that's lit by someone's flashlight beam and you lose the rest of the screen. Verticals have that inherently in the format. You know, you can only see a sliver of what's out there. And so there are types of stories that lend themselves to it real well. And then there's a lot of stuff that's just, you know, kind of like telenovelas. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's a bit salacious, but again, you know, people are watching it, you know, and I don't think it will leave people to abandon that kind of landscape, but it is another way to tell stories. And you're seeing these iterations come faster and faster and faster. But vertical exploded very quickly. Well, really.
And I think it's also just format too, right? Like, you know, yeah, you can watch TV, you can watch YouTube on your phone, or you can watch Apple TV on your phone, but is it like the best viewer experience? But with the vertical format, it's, you know, it's native. It feels like the rest, at least like the real estate that you have to operate with feels native. So it doesn't feel like you're losing anything by watching it on a smaller screen, because that is the format.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, they went, I don't know if it was it Samsung that went after the Apple for the notch, you know. I feel like that's going to come up again with vertical.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I guess you could edit for it, you know, always have like a tarp hanging, a ceiling in the foreground, but it's really interesting. And again, like, people are opting in. Vertical is a great avenue for brands to do brand storytelling. They're not going to sell it necessarily. I mean, they could, I think, if it's well enough done. But I think that those 2-minute segments and people love that bite-sized content. They really, really do. Although, you know, as I said earlier, there is more of an appetite for the longer form, but it's, you know, it's the second screen stuff. And I'm sure a lot of people are consuming the verticals while they're watching a traditional show on Netflix or Apple or HBO or wherever else.
Interesting. You've stated that one of your goals as chief creative officer is to keep creative cynicism at bay. In an industry that's currently obsessed with data, hyper targeting, algorithmic optimization, AI, how do you keep your creative teams feeling like artists rather than people who are chasing metrics?
I think a good litmus test probably for anyone in a creative leadership position, you know, really from like an ACD on up, because there are parts of the business that will make you feel certain ways, because it is a business. I mean, it's commercial art. Like, we're here to sell things. And I think if the creative meetings no longer create a sense of joy, then you've lost the plot. That's when you know. And I, you know, when I had my very first job at DDB, you know, I fell in with a crowd at that agency that was a bit cynical. And I remember like how quickly catching cynicism is. You have to be really careful, because I think it happens probably to people in any workplace, but I fundamentally think it's such an interesting business and we're very lucky to work in it. You know, we get paid to create things, and some will be more artistic than others, but they're all like they get to enter a part of culture. You get to work with incredible talents at like every step of the way, you know, from the crew to the production companies to the, you know, the talent on screen. And that's just in the space of kind of content, but, with experiential and, with gaming, we do a lot with gaming. I mean, you're working with like people that are the best of their craft. And there's a lot of crossover now, obviously, between film and advertising. And so I do fundamentally like really still love it. And I think that if you fall out of love with it, you just can't do it anymore. Like, and it does happen. You see people kind of burn out or decide it's not for them. But I still like, when I'm in those meetings, when we're like breaking stories or we're like building on an experience and people are kind of, I just find the energy unlike anything else. Like that part of work is pure joy, and then there's spreadsheets, I mean, I keep trying to uninstall the spreadsheet application from my computer, but it won't let me. But I mean, there's the stuff you don't like, the organizational stuff. And as the higher up you go, the more of that there is, the more org stuff you're going to have to deal with, the more staffing issues and things that are really kind of the business side that most people in creative didn't study and aren't necessarily interested in, but it is part of the job. But to me, the keeping the cynicism at bay is about the creation, and we have so many different disciplines, but when we kick off a broad project, we get teams from everywhere. And so there are people that are like maybe mostly focused on experience, and then they're leaning in on like a pure content brief. And you get this diversity of thinking in those meetings. I'll tell you, they're voluminous. Like the harvest is voluminous, but they're a blast. They're really fun. And I just think you get to work with sharp, interesting people in this field. And, they always say like the worst day in advertising is better than the best day in banking. Right. But I tend to agree. It's like, I've friends in other businesses, and they can't believe what we get to spend our day doing, despite kind of the obvious challenges and the headaches and how just kind of the marketplace is now. Even with that, it's still better. So I'm not saying Dylan.
I love it. And I think a client's best hour every week should be the 1 hour they spend with their agency. Do you think that, well, you've talked also about the idea that your job is about developing and defending big ideas. What does a healthy, productive fight look like between a passionate creative team and a client that has a piece of data or an insight? When do you back down? When do you stand your ground? What does healthy friction look like with clients to not talk them in or sell them something, but to give them the courage to back a big idea?
I mean, most of that is built on a relationship and trust. I don't know that there are people maybe who have a legacy of great work who can come in on day one to a new brand and kind of sell them the most audacious thing possible. And even if it runs counter to their data or their belief about the brand, I'm sure there are examples of that. But, I found that usually it's trust is won over time. Some brands are more baby steps than others. It depends. I think agencies have talent, but one of the biggest things that defines the work an agency does really is the brands they work with and the relationships they form with those brands. And, not everyone's a match, but you have to find, I think, a shared common ground. And, people paint it as, that, or to paint it as combative, I think is a little bit old fashioned. There was kind of that sense. It's like, they wanted this, but I mean, these departments, even internally, strategy and account, and production work together so seamlessly. Our strategists are in all those meetings, and the account teams. I mean, we bring those people in very early because you have to build that foundation together. And I think with the brands, the earlier they're in, the better as well. There are a lot of brands we work with where we tissue and we kind of bring them along the way. And I find that's more effective, even sometimes in a pitch, to have a check-in versus kind of working in a vacuum, and everyone has an expectation. You set out a brief, the agency has, even if you see the agency brief back and sign off on it, you kind of start to see things in your mind. And then there's a show and the curtain opens and you're like, this is not the play I came to see. It happens all the time. It's like, well, of course, because the interpretation, it's a surprise. I mean, it happens to me, right? You have a conversation with the creative team and you get a thing back. And I think you have to temper that, and you have to be open-minded to see the way other people have interpreted it. But the best kind of way with a brand is bringing them along for the ride and not ignoring like the data points they have. I don't think, I wouldn't describe, it's never, I don't think, contentious. There are times when you disagree, but you have to, again, it's a business. You have to be able to make your point in an articulate and defensible way. Even though a lot of it is kind of gut at kind of the reviewing work level, you're assuming at that point all that work has like the bedrock of appropriate strategy, and that it's true to the brand's DNA. And then there's kind of a little bit of gut, and like, I prefer A over B. But when if I take something to a brand and they're going to invest, millions of dollars in it, and then they've got, there's so many stakeholders, I think you can't just say it's cooler, it's better. There has to be a reason why you want to make it work. And then also, the agencies have to learn, different brands have different languages. I've worked with, brands where the functionally, like a CMO came up out of engineering. Well, they have a different outlook and a different way of processing things than someone who is maybe more traditionally rooted or even came out of an agency. And so I think speaking their language a little bit, understanding their pain points is really, really critical. And some of that's just maturity and time in the business. You realize that there's not necessarily any bad guys here, and you won't get necessarily everything made the way you want to make it. But if you're well informed enough, and if you're close enough to the brand, then you can help guide it to where it needs to be. But it's always iterative, and it's like, that is a journey that never ends. Like, you're never done.
On that note, as a writer who, when you should be sleeping, you're oftentimes working on young adult novels or screenplays. How do you know?
Why do you add it young? Go ahead.
How do you know when a creative project is actually done? When does finished beats perfect? When are you just over tinkering on something? When do you know something's done?
Well, it's never really done. Deadlines are great motivators. I'm a creative who needs a deadline, even if it's a self-imposed. I was writing a novel, was like a ludicrous undertaking, but I was like, well, I gave myself timelines to complete. And I think you look back at any finished work, there's in Hollywood and advertising, there's always, you're writing it like, you've got it on paper, you write it 3 times, right? On paper, on set, in post. In post, there's so many things you can play with, and you literally will run out of time and money, and that stops it. So I don't know. It's like painters say, like, there's a point where you have to put down the brush, and it doesn't mean it's finished. It just means you have to stop. And when you're talking about perfect being the enemy of great, I think you can overwork the dough, but in our business, we don't usually get the chance. Like the timelines dictate that. I've seen people with kind of like passion projects, whether in features or fine art, sculpture, painting, what have you. And I guess just over time, you learn the point where you have to set it down. But also, it's worth mentioning, you get tired of it. Personal projects, like, you're like done with that thing. And when I first started to work in Hollywood, and I've done this, I've rewritten other people's screenplays. I've rewritten screenplays, for hire, of people who are infinitely more regarded as a writer than I am, and those are like anonymous jobs. You come in and punch it up. And when I first started working in Hollywood, and you'd hear about this rewriting thing, I was like, oh my goodness, like, it sounds terrible to have some random person like working on my thing. The first time it happened, you're like, good, because I never want to see it again. Oh, you're going to take over what has become your fantastic. Have at it. And so there's that too. Just exhaustion. I think most creatives always want to do something new. Like, I always want to, do the best I can with the thing in front of me, but you've always got an eye on what's next,
Yeah. Well, and also outside perspective, sometimes, having somebody else take another look at what you're doing and add outside insight. Sometimes, that's it like you said, it gets stale. You've been with it for too long, and you're out of creative juice. And if somebody else can lend some of their creative juice to it, then that's all for the better. Yeah.
Well, the one that gets ruined the most is comedy, less in advertising, again, because of the speed. But, they'll buy a script that's very funny, television and film. But what happens is you see it, you sit with it and it's no longer funny. Well, it's because you know all the jokes, right? It's like those kids watching those shows over and over again. But I mean, you know all the jokes, and that happens a lot where that is when the dough gets overworked because the person kind of running it doesn't know when to put it down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But you're trying to recapture an initial emotion, and that's just not going to happen. It's never going to be new again. It's only new once.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think that's probably a pretty good place for us to stop. So for folks who are, wanting to follow along with your thinking, get in touch, learn more about what you guys are up to these days at TMA, where would you like to send the audience to follow along?
LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah. LinkedIn is the best place. And there's an agency website, which will be it'll be changing soon. We're branding, we're refreshing our branding, but LinkedIn is definitely the place if anyone has any questions or anything.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spending some time with the audience. Appreciate you making the time. And for those of you who are following along at home, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe if this is the first time you're seeing the show. A honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on is how we find a larger audience. And if there's an aspiring screenwriter out there, a creative, or maybe somebody who just would enjoy the ins and outs of a Super Bowl campaign that I walked through with Harris today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I'll thank you for your time and wish you a good day, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Dylan. Always great seeing you.
All right. See you soon.